Let's start. So my talk for today is on shift left testing. I call it the right way. You can decide if it works for you or if it doesn't work for you. So just quickly, briefly about myself. So I'm Toya Mamoojee. I've got about 18 years of testing experience across various industries, including test automation. Started off my career in test automation, and I've worked across various industries from financial services to telecoms to legal software development. So I've been around. I've been in the different regions also. So I'm from Cape Town in South Africa. That's my home country. I've moved to UAE about 2 years now. So I'm based in Dubai. I've worked at Majid Al Futtaim as head of QA. I then moved to Mashreq Bank. I was there briefly. And then I will soon be starting at a company called Uniphonic. I'm an international keynote speaker. I've presented various times in Europe and online. I've done some presentations and tutorials also. Some of you might be familiar with the Test Automation University. That's Andrew Jones Tao. I'm a course instructor on there. I've done a JES course. So if any of you haven't seen it, please go over to Test Automation University and check that out. I'm on Twitter. You can see my handle there, and I'm on LinkedIn also. I'll also share those details a little bit later on at the end of the talk. Okay, so let's jump straight into it. So I'm going to start off with where do we currently find ourselves? So software development and the whole software IT sort of development world has been around for decades right now. But according to Forbes article, the common software development obstacles, there's still one glaring thing that stands out, and that's the underestimation of the importance of quality assurance. So I find this really alarming because, I mean, software development world has been around for that long, but I mean, we still have this problem. QA has advanced over time, but it's still the undervaluation of it, underestimating the importance of it, that still is at the forefront of it. So let's dig into this deeply and look at what this says. So to guarantee customer satisfaction, the importance of QA should never be underestimated. To obtain high performing and secure products, quality has to be reviewed and tested continuously. So the key word here is continuously throughout the development stages. And I'll dig into a little bit more of that as we go on. So that's the backdrop of this entire talk. So like I said, we're so far down this journey. Why is it that QA is still underestimated and at times even undervalued? I'm going to take you back to sort of the software development lifecycle and where we currently find ourselves. So whether you're using the traditional waterfall approach or whether you're using agile, or whichever variation of agile, whether it's safe or Scrum or Kanban, whatever the case is, we usually go through these particular cycles or phases as the development cycle basically goes all the way until deployment. So if you see here the requirements, and sort of from the requirements all the way to design, development, testing, and support, you'll see there's a big sort of shift on towards the right-hand side, more towards the deployment and the release side of things. So this is probably the end of this mark is probably where we see the release. And you'll see that the testing actually gets left, it lags towards the end of this particular curve, if you could put it that way. So this is a bit of I wouldn't say it's an anti-pattern, but it's inefficient in many ways, and I'll unpack a little bit why I think it's inefficient and what that actually leads to. What's a knock-on effect, not just for your team, but what's a knock-on effect for your entire company, and it can have sort of devastating sort of impact for your bottom line of your company. So if we now move on, let me just see. I think my screen. Okay, sure. So I feel that testing has now become bottleneck. So as we go on towards the end of that particular cycle, like I said, the testing efforts get pushed on to the end requirements. There's not a lot of testing done. As development happens, even sometimes there's not a lot of testing done. Usually at the end of a particular sprint or release, you'll find these massive testing tasks left at the end of it. I mean, why is that so? What's the impact of all of that? we start seeing that it leads to delayed releases, right? And no one wants delayed releases. So whether many times I've seen releases pushed out, big meetings gathered, go no go meetings set up, and said we can't go in for this particular release. You know, at the end of the line, it impacts your customer base. It impacts who your users are at the end of the day. We've made promises. We've also made promise to the teams, the internal development teams, that we're releasing at this particular date, and it tends to, if you don't release at that particular date, it tends to like drop the morale of the team. The motivation goes a little bit lower. So we really don't want all of these type of delays as we go on. Um, Another big thing that I see is the late costly defect fixing that happens. So I'm sure most of you would have heard, the earlier you fix a defect, the better and the more cheaper it is. And the later you actually fix it, the more expensive it is. So if you think about that and you unpack that a little bit more, what does it mean? So obviously, the earlier you find it, there's less sort of involvement from other teams. It's just your team and yourself that actually focuses on fixing that defect. It's just a few individuals involved. But the more you actually go towards like design development, release, and integration testing, even, you're dealing with other individuals, you're dealing with other teams. It's their time involved. It could have been time that they spent on solving other issues and other problems. If you start looking at their salaries and start looking at how much time they put in, it's all of those factors that actually plays into late delivery and late defect fixing. So it has a massive impact. You might not feel it on your day to day, but according to maybe the C-level execs and senior management, it is a costly affair. Uh, so this also leads to late product software feedback, uh, product or software feedback. So if you involve your users to come in early and give you the feedback, you tend to lose out on that if you don't sort of if you release later or if you don't involve them at the outset. So this is also, you want ongoing feedback about your product. Even if it's your team that sees the product, if they get to use it, they're giving you feedback earlier on. So I think that's another key element of one of the challenges and maybe the setbacks that we're facing in terms of where we stand right now with QA and where things are. And I must add that I've seen this in practice. I've seen it across various companies that I've worked with. It's an ongoing problem. I've been engaging with many people across the testing community. You sort of hear and you read articles of like late deliveries and the missed opportunities, and all of these things are not just in one setting. It's across various companies. It's across the IT industry that you see this. Uh, so then we move over to shift left testing. So this is what the talk is about. And when you start looking at what is shift left testing, you would have probably heard of a shift left. Companies trying to sell you products that say shift left, shift left. What is shift left testing? So I like to look at shift left testing as the initial diagram that I sent to you, that I showed you on sort of the testing effort happening towards the end of the release cycle. This is actually pushing that curve a little bit more towards the left, as you can see. So you'll see the requirement, and I'm pointing at the graph at the bottom right. So the requirement, design, development stages, that's where you should focus on more of your testing effort. Your thought process starts shifting more towards the left. And if you start taking a different spin at it and a different look at things, you start looking at having a testing phase for almost each development phase or requirements phase, design phase, the coding, and then production deployment. You start moving all of that towards the left and sort of having a overlapping phase for each one of those. So I would really encourage that you challenge that thinking wherever you are, whether you're a junior tester, whether you're an intermediate or a senior tester, or whether you're even at management level. Start asking those questions around, can I do testing at this phase? Can I do testing at the requirements phase? Can I do testing at the design phase? What does testing at the requirement phase look like? it's going in and reading those requirements, looking at it and making sure that the analyst or the product owner has actually understood what is actually going in the design phase, challenging it. How am I going to use the software? Does the screen layout look correct? And then going to the developers and looking, have you written your unit test? Look at the code, go into that, and I'll speak a little bit more about that as we actually go on. So that is basically, in a nutshell, what shift left testing is. And I'll speak about some of the characteristics now of shift left testing. So this is one thing that I really advocate for, is testing in smaller units frequently and earlier on. So there's a quote there from Gary Hamel, which says, "Win small, win early, win often." That's not in a software development context at all. It's just a quote that I found, but it makes so much of sense. Test in smaller units early as the developer is building. As the analyst puts out that spec, whether it's on Colab or whether it's in some sort of location where you can read and understand the requirements, go in there and look at it. Test in smaller units, test at various levels of development, and that's basically what testing frequently and early and smaller chunks actually means. I also say that prevention is better than bug fixing, or prevention is better than cure, if that's a term, but I say prevention is better than bug fixing. So if you can go in earlier, like the things that I mentioned now, like going into the requirement phase, if you can prevent and stop those defects from actually going even in your test environment, forget about production, about it actually going into your test environment, stopping it from getting there, that's actually saving you time. It's all about finding these things and preventing it earlier. Obviously, if it slips by, you've got the testers or the QAs and your other team members that can actually find it. But let's try and work from the start first to prevent these defects from actually slipping through and going by. I always say early tester involvement. So many times I've seen testers not getting involved in the sprint planning, in the estimation, even in the backlog grooming. Get involved, get yourself in there, get yourself in those grooming sessions, in the discussion, even in the architecture sessions. I think there's many aspects where you can influence, and I'll speak about testability later. But you can influence those decisions. As a tester, the QA person always has a different view on things. So early tester involvement, challenging requirements, and doing all of those things early on is really, really good for the entire process. So one thing I just want to touch on here, this is an important slide, and there's a misconception that only test automation will give you shift left testing. And just let that sit in a little bit with everyone. I'm telling you that's a misconception. Only test automation is not going to get you there. It's never going to get you towards moving everything shift left. It is a part of it, most definitely, but it's not the only thing. So I'll give you a brief example. This is a real world example of where one of my companies that I've worked with for quite a while, I've worked there and we've made progress of our shift left journey. So what actually used to happen in the past was we had the development cycle, and at the same time we built a test automation suite which actually ran for hours. So because we had issues in sort of running them during the day, we let them run overnight. And this was your massive end-to-end sort of pack. When we came in the morning to identify what was actually broken, we had to sift through tons of results. We had to sift through, where has the actual test broken? What has broken? Has it broken because of my test environment? Has it broken because of code? Has it broken because my script is bogus? My validations and my assertions are not correct. We couldn't pinpoint it because we were too high up. We needed to drill down a little bit more as to where the changes were, rather than coming and almost shooting in the dark and trying to find where the issues are. So we gradually started moving that and shifting that concept about why are we shifting, or why are we testing in an automated fashion so late on? We need to almost test as the changes are happening and run them regularly. And I think that's where we've had a massive change and a massive shift. So if you look at where we were maybe like 7 or 8 years ago versus where the company is now, there's so much that has happened, and there's so much of um, of checkpoints that we've put in place to actually better how we operate. And I'll speak a little bit more about how you can move your automation aspects also left as we go on. So just bear that in mind. Just doing test automation on its own is simply not going to cut it as I'm doing shift left testing the proper way. Okay, so that's an important concept to keep in mind. Um, I'll just jump into the benefits. So it's almost self-explanatory. I feel the benefits in a way, because if you shift left, I think you can reduce the costs. Like I mentioned, if you're fixing things early, if you're involving everyone early, it means there's less mess to clean up at a later stage. So your developers are doing more productive things rather than fixing of those defects later on. They can move on to the next product and potentially shift out and test and release a lot more products and different functionality out there. So reducing your costs, I would say, is definitely a big one. I would think higher efficiency, because now you're churning out things a lot more faster. You're releasing a lot more features, much more at a rapid rate. I would say the efficiency improves. In a way, also, I would think together with efficiency comes the team morale. The team morale definitely feels a little better than when you're fixing things and you're constantly fixing. You have higher quality because you're testing lower down. You're testing each change that is made at that point in time, and then naturally you start having a competitive advantage over your competitors, and it gives you the market edge. So those, I would say, in a nutshell, is the benefits of shift left testing. So I'm not going to go into too much of detail in the benefits of it, because it almost feels like a sales pitch, but I don't want to do that. So I want to go into the practical sort of nature of how we get there. So we spoke about where we are. We spoke about what we all know that is a theoretical part, but how do we get there? And I think that's the most important thing that I'm really passionate about, is the practical nature of things. How to get closer to shift left testing, and I'll touch on to some of them right now. So for me, a big key enabler in order to shift left is to design for testability. So improving application testability is key. So like I said before, if the QA or if the tester is far removed from what the architectural and how the system interacts with each other, and not have a say in how that is actually built, then I think obviously in some big corporates, maybe it's difficult to get into the architectural discussions. But I think, even if you can let your test manager or let your test lead or your test architect in on it and tell them, please keep me updated with, what's happening. How can we improve our application testability? By testability, what do I mean by testability? Your system needs to be, if you look at some of the older systems and more of the monolithic systems, it's very hard for you to get into the code and understand what's actually happening in the code. Whereas with some of your microservices and your modern technology, you can actually get in and understand, how the application is built. So almost having that white box view into a system rather than the black box view is really key, because you can actually then interact with APIs, you can interact with the modules, the interdependency of different aspects of your application, and test at that particular level. So improving application testability is key. I've worked in situations where the system was extremely difficult to actually, even get into. So, your SAP type systems, your Siebel type systems, it's very difficult to actually get into, understanding how the system is actually developed, because it's potentially maybe a vendor software, and you can't really get in. Potentially speak to the vendor to see if you can add hooks into it. Exposing APIs or exposing web services can be a method of actually getting into testing for making your application a little bit more testable, right? And then a big one for me is controlling your test environment. So many times I've seen your test environments are all over the place. It's either down, you don't have control of it. Finding test data is a mission. Going and looking for test data, emailing another team or emailing another system to say, please give me this test data because I don't have it. What happens then? It actually holds up the entire process. Your sprint sits in isolation for that particular day, waiting for that testing sticky to move on because I don't have test data, right? Or have a poorly controlled test environment. So what I'm saying is, find ways to make your environment a little bit more controlled. Can you isolate your environment? Can you actually use things like Docker, where you potentially spin up your entire testing application with all of its dependencies and test against those? Then in that way, you can potentially also mock out your test data. Mock out your test data, be in control of your environment, and potentially other things fall into place. And you're not that dependent. You can start testing early rather than waiting for the entire other applications to be integrated. So that's a big one for me, is controlling your test environment. Another one that I see as another enabler to shift left is visual, transparent, and accessible test results. So I'm going to unpack this a little more. In that previous example that I gave you regarding, having the test suite run at the end of it, and only, potentially only the testers or automation testers having exposure to access those test results. So that's inefficient in a way. You need to make your test results accessible for everyone to know what was actually run. It needs to be transparent. So it needs to hook in almost to like your agile process, whether you're using Jira or Trello, whatever the case is for managing your backlog and your sprints. It needs to feed into that. It needs to have a visual aspect to it. If it's hidden and no one knows what you're actually running, in a way, you're not making it a team effort. You're making it only an automation effort, or only a QA, or only a testing effort. It's not the case. So to shift left, you need the teamwork. You need everyone involved. You need to show your test results. So that's another key enabler to shift left testing. I've spoken about your entire team. So cross-team collaboration is really important. Different developers, different analysts, different team members picking up tasks that potentially maybe the tester was only doing before, and vice versa. So, it doesn't stop the tester from actually picking up reviewing a unit test, or contributing towards requirements or something of that sort. Everyone needs to be cross-skilled, and cross-team collaboration is really important. Like I said, if you have the visual representations and visual strategies about doing things, I think it'll take you a step further towards shifting left. So cross-team collaboration is another massive aspect around shifting left. Another big one, many of you would have seen this CI/CD sort of diagram, and I'm focusing more on the aspects on the left, but not to negate the items that happen on the right. So the ones that happen on the left is pre-release, and the ones that happens on your right is pre-deployment, and the ones that happen on your right-hand side is sort of post-deployment. So by no means am I not advocating for shift right. So shift right is more, you can also, in your deployment, you can measure, you can monitor, you can operate. There's many things that can come out of shift right also, where you can influence what test cases you actually build. So, but I'm focusing on the left-hand side, of the testing, releasing, building, like I mentioned before, having them in a CI integrated into continuous integration pipeline. The example I gave you earlier, once again, is running that suite at the end of it. Why wait till the end of it? Why wait for maybe something to be deployed 10 times during the day, but you can actually test when it's deployed once, immediately after it's deployed and built. Test immediately there, rather than wait for 10 deployments that happen during the day, but I'm only testing once. So if you test when something is deployed and built, you actually can find out the issue immediately, and you can iron out the issue that actually happens. So CI and building things into your pipelines, building your test into pipelines, and understanding. I'll speak a little bit more about that when I speak about the tools sections of it. Anton, am I a good pace? Do you have any questions or anything I should just pause on
Yeah,
here?
yeah. Uh, Generally, we have like an hour for a talk. You just spent 30 minutes, so
Sure. Okay.
it's okay.
Cool. Cool. Okay, sure. The biggest enabler. So, Anton, I'm probably like midway or like maybe like three-quarter into my talk. So, yeah, I'll probably go over maybe about 10 minutes or so of around there, if that's okay.
Okay, I will.
Okay.
Okay, I will ping you.
Sure. Okay, so I think the biggest enabler though is the mindset. So just having a shift in the mindset and having that ability to see, what is the end goal is more important than anything else that I've said. So the mindset is the first step in enabling everything else that I've just spoken about. So think about that. If you can get your company or your leaders to start shifting their mindset around what is the end goal, then I think it's really important to get us towards shift left testing. So um, tools, and more tools. We're still focusing on the how aspect, and I'll unpack a little bit more of these. So once again, I'm going collaborate, build, test, deploy, and run. So post deployment from the right-hand side is more on the right and the shift right. So I'm going to focus on the left-hand side of things. So when you speak about collaborate, we've got various tools that can enable us to collaborate from an application lifecycle management side. You've got your tools like Jira and Trello, building in traceability of your test cases and your scenarios, making them accessible for everyone is something that can be done. Key regular updates regarding your day-to-day testing related issues, that can't be underestimated. Keep everyone in the loop. If you are not there tomorrow, the next person, the next QA, or the your next team member can pick up your task. So be transparent around what you've done and how you've actually executed and what's left to do. From a communication and sort of chat ops perspective, if you look at things like Slack and maybe Teams, probably the two things that stand out there, you can add in test related hooks. So if you're building your automation suite, make sure to try and add in hooks to tie back into Slack, or Teams, or various whatever chat applications you're using at your company. Have testing channels for constant communication to keep everyone updated. Knowledge sharing, like I said, early testing on requirements. Um, these are things like whether it's Confluence or GitHub Pages, whatever the case is, whatever you're using. Have clear, concise testing and automation related knowledge sharing aspects, so that can never be underestimated. When you're building, so this is another important aspect. Um, I'm talking about things like Git and potentially GitLab and Bitbucket. Have a full understanding. Everyone learn build tools, not just the developers. Have your analysts, and more importantly, have your QAs and your test engineers understand how source control works. Contribution of your automation code. Don't let your automation code sit on your machine, somewhere in isolation. Put it into the source control tool. Make it accessible for everyone. Uh, do that, and you'll see a big change and a shift. Like I mentioned earlier, CI, understanding of the CI tools, understanding of pipelines, how they actually work, incorporating those automation tests into CI, whether using Drone.io, Circle CI, or TeamCity, even GitLab, who has some deployment tools. And I think you're going to be speaking about that later, Anton. So that's where this fits in. Automation, incorporating that into CI. Then your build tools, understanding of your build tools. Build tools for automation is key, whether you're using Maven, SPT for Scala World, that type of thing. And also understanding how your DBs work, how they deployed, how are they populated, whether using Flyway migration scripts for deployment of your databases. Understand that and understand how it actually works. Then on the testing side, I'm sure many of you are used to almost all of these tools, right? So there's a tool for everything. Test tools targeting different layers. Whether you are doing UI testing, using Selenium or Cypress, whether you're using API testing, if you're using Postman or JMeter, or Jest, or whatever the case is, test tools targeting different layers. Make your test tools able to be proficient across your team, not just the testers again. Like I said, build tools not just for developers, test tools not just for testers, for the entire team. And then have a clear definition on your test automation approach. Make sure it's documented and that everyone knows what approach you're going for the different levels. So enforce that, and I'll speak about the test strategy shortly. So just a few slides left to go. I'm just going to be touching on some of the practical examples around shift left testing, implementing shift left testing practices. One big one for me is whether using Scrum, Kanban, or whatever the case is, uh, ignore maybe the other lanes. I'm just speaking about the testing specific lane, or if it's not the test lane, um, have a testing task per dev task or per analyst task. So when a dev puts on a sticky, or when there's a sticky on the board for a dev or analytical task, before that gets moved over to done and complete or complete, ask the question, can there be testing done on the story? So always ask that question, can testing be done, before it's actually moved over? And you'll be amazed with the shift that provides. So I had an example, I recall a few years back, where a database administrator added a column to a DB. That task was going to be moved over very quickly to done. I said, hang on, I think testing can be done on that. I can validate how that column is actually created, what values are in there, what's the length, is it made up of string, is it a date character, you validate the dates, validate certain aspects on that particular column. And it's amazing, I actually found a massive issue on that particular column, that if it went to production, it would have caused a massive uproar. That was found without any hoo-ha, without any noise, and we fixed it immediately then and there. So that's how you can implement something lower down, like testing task per dev task, or analyst, or dev, or DBA task. I've spoken about this before, whole team testing approach. I've noticed also that sometimes even devs will not move a task. If there's something in the sort of doing column, the dev will be hesitant to move that task over until the QA has actually tested it, right? or checked something. I'm saying empower everyone in the team. Maybe if the dev has built it, get another analyst who can potentially check it. If everything is documented, if you have a proper testing strategy, why is there hesitance on others picking up tasks to actually move over to done? You don't have to wait for your QA. You don't have to wait for your tester to move that over to done. Have a whole team testing approach to solving your problems, and in that way you can move closer to shifting left. Having an all-encompassing test strategy, I think I touched on it briefly earlier. Mention your exit test criteria for your sprint, your release. Mention what you're going to actually be doing at various levels. What tool are you using for performance testing? Where are you getting your test data from? Which environments do you do certain things on? Which environment do you sign off your testing? When you log your defects, are you logging it based on priority? What makes a priority? All of those things make it clear, so that anyone who needs to log a defect or log something or work something in the testing aspect knows exactly what needs to be done. So an all-encompassing test strategy is really important. I'm coming closer to the end now. Bring automation code closer to the source code. Like I said earlier, no silos. So one of the other steps we've made previously was, we used to have a separate repo for automation code and a separate repo for our source or our application code. What a massive shift we made was to actually move our automation code or testing folder into the source code where things actually resided. So now the devs were more sort of invested in the repo and sort of understanding the tests, rather than, I don't care if your test automation code or test has failed. I don't care about that. But now it's more of, I do care, because that sits within my repo. And if you make it part of the pipeline, it's even more sort of a vested interest for them. So move your automation code closer. If you are too far in, maybe you say, I'm too far in. I can't really try all of these things that you mentioned. Um, like try before you buy. Why not choose a subset of a team, a smaller team? If there's a new product coming down the line, if there's a new team being formed, why not say let's use this as the the guinea pig? Let's use this as trying this process out. Pick a small team, get the testers involved early, get the devs involved early, build all of these aspects that I mentioned, build in automation at the different levels, build your Scrum board or your Agile board in a particular way that you're now incorporating and you're asking the questions around testing. So try and do all of those things before you actually fully, if you're not convinced about this, like try before you buy and try to implement all of these things. I'm not sure if you're going to be sharing the slides afterwards, Anton, but those are things that potentially people can just reference back as what are the key enablers and ask those
Yeah,
questions.
usually I'm attaching the slides to the
Okay.
video on YouTube.
Sure. I'll share the slides with you afterwards. Uh, and then, so let's just go quickly in summary. So we spoke about shift left testing that done the right way. Where are we currently? We spoke about the challenges that we're currently facing. We spoke about what is shift left testing. We spoke about that whole moving the testing efforts more towards the requirements and the development phase of things. We spoke of the benefits of shift left testing, higher efficiency, higher quality, more productivity. We spoke about key enablers to shift left testing. Those are things around like CI/CD, improving application testability, control test environments. We then moved to tools and more tools. We spoke about collaborating, building, the testing tools that we have. We then jumped into practical examples of shift left. Whether it's actually looking at your task or your sprint board again, looking at whole team testing approach, encompassing all-encompassing test strategy. Those are your key things that to look at. So that's it for me. You can find me on Twitter. I'll keep these things a little bit longer. If anyone wants to scan the QR codes, you can find me on Twitter, and you can find me on LinkedIn. I usually respond to DMs and private messages. So sometimes not immediately, but as soon as I get a chance, I will respond. So every one of you who wants to add me on those platforms, please go ahead and feel free to add me. And that's it. You choose your way, left or right. I think it's up to you, or in between. Thank you so much. Thanks, Anton.
Thank you very much, Toyer. It was insightful, and thank you very much for joining the meetup. I just wanted to mention that you responded very quickly to all my questions and concerns regarding the talk. So thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
Let me first, please, just read some questions that we have, and later I will let everybody unmute. So we have, for example, question from someone with nick iPhone. Developers viewpointed that you can ask questions after change is done and available in test environment. Then ask questions if there are any issues or you want to know how to use that change. So developers sometimes, I would say it's quite often, they are living in a world where testers should be as right as possible. That yes, how to prove that this concept will work and it will help even developers work more productive.
I think you can choose an example, right? I mean, you can choose a working example of something that potentially, let's just say, for example, you don't have any integration test, but the developer wants you to build, wants you to build an automation test at the end of it. Let's just say there's a validation service that the developer has built, and that validation service manifests itself on the front end, and he or she only wants you to test on the front end to test those validations. So you go into the entire flow. Let's just say, for example, you're opening up a bank account and you're selecting maybe for the validation you have to be over 18, as an example, over 18 years of age. So to test that entire flow, potentially to go to the validation point, you'd have to enter maybe two other screens from the front end to actually go to where you enter your age. And if you're entering the age on that screen, maybe you'll run your test and you'll go to page 3, you'll enter the validation, and then you potentially found your issue, you potentially found your test where it's saying, okay, I'm entering under 18, you cannot open an account. Then you do one where the guy is 18, he can open an account, and then one is greater than 18, as an example. You have to go write that entire test, which is inefficient now, from the front end to actually go and test everything, but you just want to test the validation service. So why not challenge the developer to say, I can write this level of testing on the back end or on the integration layer where I can test the different permutations without going to the front end. And then in the front end, I can just test one particular scenario where, I'll test maybe a happy case, but you've tested the validation parts and you've proven that it actually, it works. So, those are the type of things you have to challenge developers at the end of the day. You have to challenge, the different people in your team. It's not to say you're fighting with them. It's more of a challenge to try and see how we can get them more efficient. So those are the type of things you can potentially do. There is one example that came to mind. I think there's many other examples that do come to mind, actually, Anton.
Yeah, thank you. And also, Abdul Faras is asking great question: how to get bigger organizations to have mindset to change and adopt shift left testing? Because when you're a small team, when you're a startup, it's quite easy.
Yes.
Because the team is basically small, you can talk with each other and decide. If you're in big organization, some huge company, so how to move?
I've been on either end of the spectrum, right? My bulk of my career has been at large corporations. So I've basically, my last slide, when I spoke about the practical example, is if you are too far in and you potentially don't have the ability to influence, why not choose a smaller team or choose a smaller project? If you are, if you are in your particular team, the next project that you're working, why not try that particular working model, and prove the concept that it actually works in there. That's one approach that you can actually do, is do that. The next thing you can do is raise awareness around these things, right? And potentially go out and look for case studies of this particular success and bring the leaders in, bring the architects in, and show them that this is what someone like a ThoughtWorks or someone like McKinsey is coming and like advocating for, whether it's case studies out there, outside. It is there. Like, I mean, you can start, either using practical examples or bring the facts in and say, these will give us efficiencies. It will be difficult to break down. Like I said, we've been through a journey where we had to, trial and error, try different things. It didn't work. You failed. You go back to the drawing board. How do you get management's buy-in? Those things are difficult, but I mean, it has to be done. You have to start off small. You have to start off somewhere to try and get the influence. Build that internal community. Get people on your side, right? Get management on your side. Get if you are sitting as a junior tester somewhere down here and you feel you don't have the influence up there, go to your intermediate tester, go to your senior tester, go to your test lead. Build that sort of like reputation all the way up, and then they can advocate the message for you. So that's basically how you can do it. I've given a few examples of how you can implement that. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Also, we have a question from Natalia. Can you talk more about SaaS? I think she's talking about some tools that are available as a service. Let me first answer, because I think when you're just starting your QA career, there are a lot of tools, and you can just spend a lot of time digging and trying to understand them. But I would say that you should start with tools that are already applicable for your team. So if you joined a team and the team is using let's say Jira and Confluence, you will not be able to move them to something else. You just have to like be part of the team and use the same tools. So I would say the first steps would be just ask developers and more senior uh, team members about how to use that tool, where I can find some documentation. Maybe team members created some kind of wiki where you can find the details about their uh, understanding how these things should work together. What do you think?
No, I fully agree with you. I fully agree with you. Like you need to choose your testing tools wisely, the ones that actually make sense for your organization. If you're going to choose also the ones that you have support inside your company for. So sometimes, if you are a Java house, if you are predominantly JavaScript, for example, make sure that the route that you go down is almost related to the same um, code base or the same coding language that your developers are familiar with, so that if you do get stuck, you can ask for assistance in that. So do proper research around what tools suits your organization. Like you mentioned, Anton, I think it's key that you make sense of why you are choosing a tool. Um, make sure that almost like the language, if you're building React, for example, my first point of touch, I'm not saying that it will definitely always be JavaScript, but my first place to go start looking will be JavaScript solution, because it's React based. So ask those type of questions initially, around the tool selection and what you actually choose. Make sure there's enough community support out there. Like if it's a brand new tool, maybe there's no documentation online, maybe there's no one who can support you in the testing community. I know when a tool like Cypress came out, I was one of the first that actually started playing with it, but I was also hesitant to go very far down because I knew there was a lack of support in the community. It since built, it's built over time. But I mean, those type of things, even if it's things like Test Cafe or some of the other tools that's out there, like they are building in momentum. But make sure there's a community support. Make sure you have, if you don't have that, you have some internal support and you have developer support around the coding aspects. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. So let me maybe at the end I will allow to ask questions without mic. Just a second. And allow unmute. So if anyone wants to ask question, you can just unmute yourself and ask it now.
Maybe a small question: when you have different teams and different stack of technologies like clouds, browser stacks, Dockers, all this complex stuff, with state-of-the-art technologies that with microservices and green-blue deployments, all these terraforms, different zoo of everything. And you have big integrations like banking applications and data sources, different databases, NoSQLs, SQLs, complex, high level of complexity, and you trying to making shift left across a big organization with all this transformation. Is it worth to have, I don't know, some regular trainings, maybe regular catch-ups, regular team members going from one team for a month to another team to share ideas, to bring the same understanding for different people, like because different even QAs have their mindset and focus like on Python, Java, but when we have scripting languages and other languages, no one's want to be full stack, and everyone limited to his own vision. So what would you recommend in such situation for big companies?
Yeah. So I think the cross skilling aspect of like moving team members, it can work. Like I've seen it work in instances where that we've done a bit of rotation around different squads. So if there's a technology or there's a tool that was used to implement something, and if there's similar technology being built in another team and you want to implement the same process, then rotation is definitely on the cards. It's also in big organizations, it's also important that you build a community of practice. And what I mean by that is like, the testing fraternities stick together. Like I've worked in previous companies where, testers, the QAs were almost split, like they didn't care what was happening in another team, right? But I feel that in a way, whether it's a test architect or the test manager, needs to get this cohort of individuals together so that they build this community of practices in understanding how, what is used when and how it's used efficiently. So, especially in big corporations, whether it's the banks, I've spent the bulk of my career in banks and in sort of financial companies, and that has been something that has worked really well. Is building this community of practices, getting everyone aligned to how things are working, how things are built, having a space where testers can contribute together. So you have your team context, where you might have documentation of your team, your product, your functional areas, but you also have in-depth documentation about the tools. If you have something where you have to do performance testing on APIs, that's documented for you. If you have to go into the cloud and test Terraforms or test infrastructure as code, you have an approach of how to actually go about testing that. So building testing community of practices internally and possibly externally outside of your company. I've done that recently over maybe like the 4 years that's passed. Get involved with like the testing community outside and how are people building that, so I think those type of things really work, where you can build those practices. You might get certain outliers, like you mentioned, maybe the cloud approach is slightly different, or like Mongo, like the NoSQL stuff versus database and Microsoft SQL. You might get those outliers where you've been down the avenue where something that you tried is potentially you've used before, maybe on SQL databases. Maybe you won't go for that same approach, but you've exhausted that approach of saying, I've been down the route, I've investigated everything that we did for SQL databases, but I can't do it with NoSQL. I have to try a different approach. So make sure that you've at least exhausted that venues, and you're now looking at what other aspects you can support.
Yeah.
So those are the things: testing community practices and playing around with different tools. Yeah.
And
thank you.
I just Thank you.
Thanks for your
have
question.
an addition. Like, if you have a big company, it's worth to organize some kind of meetup for all the QAs that you have in teams to share this knowledge and to make some common place where you can discuss and ask the questions. Because if you are working with some project with some set of tools, you will not be able to learn like all kind of stacks that are available. So definitely you need to share and get this knowledge from someone else. And I would say that the only anti-pattern I see that some huge companies are trying to create QA like a service team where there is a silo of QAs and they just put something in this silo and waiting for the result.
Yeah.
Please do not go such way, because it will drastically decrease the efficiency. I still believe that QA integrated in feature team is more productive.
I agree. Yeah. I agree with you, Anton. I think we had this discussion a while ago also. Like, I think the tester in isolation, just like how the automation code in isolation is not it's not the most effective thing to do. I mean, you will get times where maybe you have to start up a team to get something up and running. Then it's okay as long as it's not a long term type of a thing. So I think it's really important that you incorporate your testing team together with the feature and what's actually being built, because in that way you're closer to what's actually happening rather than having these silos everywhere. So correct, yes.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Okay. Hi. When you're presenting with the shift left, I've seen that one of your slide has the shift left implementation. Okay. If you're okay going to that slide of the first, where you have the shift left implementation, the workflow actually.
The workflow. Okay, this one.
Yes. Okay.
Yep.
So it's actually kind of the software development life cycle we have with the V model, right? It is also the same kind of a way where we have the same way of implementing in the V model, where we'll be interacting in the same level of implementation. Whether while we are doing requirement analysis, we will be in the phase of requirement analysis that we will be going under that kind of a phase of testing. So it is the same kind of V model. So how come that is much different when you say shift left? Because we are doing the same kind of implementation when we are following the V model, right? And we came so long in the software testing that we are in agile, Scrum, Kanbans, and shift left. But we're still kind of I feel it's more relevant to the V model, right?
Yeah, I think you spotted there, but I think so if you look at where the V model has come in, it's focused more around development rather than testing, or the entire software development process, right? So and with sort of the progress of agile as things went on, maybe people overlooked the basics. So you might think it's almost second nature that if we follow the V model, we definitely follow that in. But we've gone so far down the path of agile, but the problems still, lie there. So I think it's just a matter of that mindset where people need to physically say, I need to overlap my testing phase with each of the previous, of the requirement phase, for example. It was for a very long time sort of only looked at from a development aspect around the verification, the V model, right? And I think now that we've shifted towards agile, potentially that's been forgotten. So sometimes it's just getting back to basics, right? And getting basics of understanding that. So even when the V model was there, and it's predominantly. So I remember I joined the software development world when, maybe the waterfall was just like phasing off. The V model should have been predominantly there, but it wasn't. We also found ourselves, leaving testing to the end, having the inefficiencies in the release cycle. So something went wrong somewhere where we didn't follow the basics. So this way of also, me speaking about the shift left is also around the practical implementation of doing these things, especially now with us moving to CI/CD, moving towards the collaboration tools that we have. Why not use it in an efficient way? And I think that's the gist of like where I was trying to get with this particular talk. Maybe shift left was always there. It was just how are people doing it, and are they practicing these aspects and these examples that I mentioned. I think that's basically what the gist of it was. Yeah.
Okay, so it's the shift left is nothing but the corrections what we are trying to correct ourselves in industry what we are actually could not do it, right?
Correct.
With the V model, so we are trying to do the it's a name that we are using as a shift left, but it's more of a V model kind of implementation. We're still following it, but we are coming with our mistakes what we have done previously over the V model, the implementation. So we are here. The shift left will be purely focused on the testing side of it, and as we are growing towards continuous integration and the delivery side of it, so we're trying to focus more on the testing before we release it. So that's all it means.
Yeah, it's the quality aspects that you're building into it, right? So like even when you think about the V model, were people talking about testability? Were people thinking about how are we going to test our application? They were more focusing on how we're going to build the application to release. So we are saying, how you're building it with testability in mind? How are we building quality in mind? So I think it's the whole, thinking about it more proactively. So if you look at the concept of shift left, so it's not something that I'm coining. It's something that is fairly new. That was maybe, I would probably think, I don't know how long, but probably over the last 5 years, it's gained momentum. You've seen companies like, I wouldn't mention the name, but like big companies have actually used it as part of sales pitches to try and sell the product, to say, we're moving closer towards the code, moving closer towards the requirements. So companies have used this as part of their sales pitches and start of their sales target to actually make the sales, to make people more aware. Like even with the move of open source versus commercial automation tools, commercial tools at the time were more. I don't think they started looking at like the testability aspects. Only when we moved into open source and people realized that, okay, we can start infiltrating and testing lower down, did the whole sales and the more advocation of shift left started becoming more prominent at that time. So that's basically what I think it's a refinement. We always try to better ourselves, right? So I think with the software development process, it's the same thing. It's just like getting back to basics, understanding, pinpointing that this is actually what needs to happen, and move forward from there. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think we are just advocating ourselves to be better.
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, but we have lack of time. Sorry.
Yes, it's perfectly fine, Anta. Thanks for the question so much. I didn't get your name, but thanks for the question.